And welcome to the third session in our Money Makeover series. Tonight, our focus is on pensions. My name's Jessica Beard. I'm the pensions reporter at the Telegraph, and I write for the Money Desk. So now I'd like to welcome our guest, Kate Smith. Kate is the Telegraph's pension doctor columnist. Kate works at Aegon, which is a large pension provider, and she's worked in the pensions industry for 35 years now. Over the next 45 minutes, I'll be picking Kate's brains with all our pension questions.
Hi, hello Jessica, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you doing?
Not too bad. It's sunny where I am at the moment.
It's snowing down in London.
Let's go to
Let's get started. So we've got loads of topics to cover. So many questions were sent in. And I think the best place to start is probably with the lifetime allowance. So we've received an overwhelming amount of questions about this. And I guess it's down to the recent news. So for those who aren't up to speed, the lifetime allowance places a limit on how much you can put into your pension tax-free. So that usually rises with inflation every year. But the Chancellor at the spring budget this year announced that that'll be frozen at the current threshold. So that's just over £1 million. And that'll be frozen for the next 5 years. So there are quite a few complex rules around the lifetime allowance and how it works. And a lot of the questions that were sent in asked for specific worked examples. So Kate, could you just run us through how it works in practice?
Yeah, so really starting at the top. So once you start taking or crystallising your pension benefits, either as a cash sum, tax-free cash sum, or retirement income, it's then tested against the lifetime allowance that's in force at the time. It's tested by your pension provider or whoever runs your pension scheme. And they should then, once they've done the test, they'll provide you with a certificate which shows you the percentage that you've used up. And that's not only show you how much you've used up, but also whether there's a tax charge payable. And that's if you've crystallised more benefits than the lifetime allowance. So I've got a very, very simple example. Sorry, my phone is a bit funny. So let's assume that someone's got a personal pension of £600,000. They've got no other pension benefits at all, so it's just £600,000. And let's assume that individual takes a quarter, 25% as a tax-free cash sum, that's about £150,000, and moves the rest, £450,000, into a Flexi Access income drawdown account. So what happens then is the pension provider will test that £600,000 against the current lifetime allowance. So this individual's used up about 60% of the lifetime allowance. And that percentage is then fixed regardless of whether the lifetime allowance changes. So I'm hoping that in 5 years' time, it's going to start increasing again in line with the consumer price index. But the key thing is that percentage does not change. And for this particular example, there is no lifetime allowance charge payable because, as you see, the amount the person has saved is less than lifetime allowance. So that's it. There's no charge payable. So obviously that's a really, really simple example. And in reality, of course, people have more than one pension, and they have more than one pension, probably with different pension providers, and they might be taking or crystallising pensions at different times and doing different things. So each time they do that, they crystallise a pension, the pension provider will have to carry out the test against the lifetime allowance. So that's a very simple example. I can go on and talk about another one if you want, about if the lifetime allowance has been exceeded. That's slightly different. That's when the charge will actually happen.
Yeah, so what would happen if someone had over the threshold, which at the moment is, just over that £1 million?
Yes, because obviously I think that more people are going to be caught by the lifetime allowance because it's frozen. It wasn't exactly as expected and people are keeping on saving. So I think more people are going to get caught. So let's assume in this other example that someone's got personal pension benefits of 1.2 million. So that's just above the lifetime allowance. They haven't got any protection, so we can talk about that later. So they've got about 126,900, 127,000 pounds above the standard lifetime allowance as it is today. So that's an excess of 12%. So let's assume all the benefits are crystallised at once, so all at the same time, which is unusual, just for simplification, we'll say that. So what you need to do is look at the benefits that are below and up to lifetime allowance, so current amount, and then look at that, and then separately look at the excess benefits. So you would, let's say you crystallize the 100%, take 25% tax-free cash sum, and the remainder 75% as an income. Those benefits are within a lifetime allowance. There's no charge on those particular benefits. But then you have to do a separate test for the benefits exceeding lifetime allowance. So that's the almost 127,000. And there will be a tax charge on that. So depending on how you take that, there's two different tax charges. There's one on, if you take it as a lump sum, and that tax charge is 55% of those excess funds. So 55% of that 127,000. So 55% goes to the taxman, and 45% will be paid out to you. If you took that excess as an income, there'll be a tax charge of 25%. And then that's paid to you as an income, the remainder 75%. And then you, as an individual, will pay income tax on that, your marginal rate, whatever that is, basic rate, higher rate, whatever. So that means what I'm showing you there is the lifetime allowance charge is actually payable when the benefits are taken. And there may be situations where the individual decides to delay taking the benefits, but as soon as they does take them, the charge is payable. And these tax charges, the 55% for cash and 25% plus marginal tax rate for taking income, they've been designed to be tax neutral for higher rate taxpayers.
Okay, and so say for someone who is over that threshold, is it possible, this was one of the questions that was sent in, is it possible to avoid the lifetime allowance charge with careful drawdown?
Yeah, that's a really, really common question. We get that all the time as a pension doctor and, you know, here at Aegon. And the very, very simple answer is no, you can't avoid it. But it is possible to manage how and when you take those benefits, so how and when you crystallize your benefits and breach the lifetime allowance. And you can delay that for as long as possible, particularly if you're in an income drawdown, because of course you can take out as much money or as little money as and when you wish. No, it's totally up to you. So one thing you could do is using delaying tactics, basically. So you could crystallize your benefits up to 100% of the lifetime allowance, whatever it is, say by moving those monies into an income, effectively access income drawdown account, and leaving the rest uncrystallized, so it's left back behind in your pension. You haven't touched it. But once you've crystallized your pension and it's in the income drawdown, of course, you would hope that it would get some sort of investment growth, and let's hope it does. So it still has that potential to grow and therefore exceed any future lifetime allowance. But it's been crystallized once, so measured against the lifetime allowance when that happened. But the thing to remember is the HMRC, they're coming very clever, and they've got a catch-all rule in place, and it's the age 75 rule. And that will catch any investment growth that you've got in your income drawdown account. So what happens is another test is carried out once you get to age 75 by your pension provider. And they look at the investment growth in any income drawdown account, and they'll look at any pension funds you haven't crystallized, they're still in the pension pot. So there could be, if there's been exceptional growth or you've gone over the lifetime allowance, you haven't got protected lifetime allowance, there will be a charge payable then. But the key thing is that benefits aren't tested twice. So it's a different test on a different set of benefits. And just one other thing to point out, you know, I did say you can't avoid it and you can't avoid it. Paying this charge because it's the scheme, so the pension provider and yourself are jointly responsible for paying that tax charge. And often the pension provider will pay that on your behalf. They'll let you know, but they'll pay it, and they'll pay it across to HMRC.
Fair enough.
Can't get around it.
Yeah. Okay, and then on the protection front, so we got a lot of questions about this too. Yeah. People asking about, can people get protection today against this new limit?
Right, they can get protection today, but it's not specifically designed against this new limit. I mean, basically, I'll just go back into a bit of history of why we've got protection against these tax charges that I mentioned earlier. The lifetime allowance was introduced back in April 2006. It was part of what was known in those days as the pension tax simplification rules. And this, at the time, it was 1.5 million, and then it went up to 1.8 million about, I don't know, 2010 or so. And then it started coming down. And when it started coming down, HMRC started putting protections in place. That was because individuals didn't know it was going to come down. So they had been, quite rightly, been saving, and the amount that they'd saved might be close to the lower lifetime allowance or even above it. So there were options to actually apply for protection against the charges at a certain amount. I'm not going to go into all those protections because every time the lifetime allowance has gone down, the revenue has brought in new forms of protection, and apparently there's 7 in place at the moment. So I haven't got time for all of that. But so there are still some protections that you can apply for today. Some of the old ones you can't anymore. So these ones are called the Fixed Protection 2016 and Individual Protection 2016. They're quite different, but they broadly protect you about up to 1.25 million. And there are different rules about whether you can keep on paying contributions or not. But broadly, they do give you a bit of protection, and you can still apply to HMRC for that protection. There are other rules about who can actually apply. So I'm not going to cover it all that detail today, but these rules, they will fall away once the lifetime allowance gets above 1.25 million or above what your individual protection is under the 2016 rules. But as we know, that might not be for quite a few years now. But it's worth, if you're in that boat, if you feel that it would be a good thing to do, definitely have a look and see whether it's relevant to you. Okay,
and could you just briefly run us through, I think one interesting point is how it works for defined benefit pensions. I know that recently I looked into how the freeze does seem unfair on certain private sector workers compared to public sector pensions, just because of the amount of retirement income that you can get out of it and while staying below the threshold. So could you just walk us through how that works?
Yeah, so for defined benefit, how you value your pension income against the lifetime allowance is basically you take your first annual pension when you actually start drawing your DB pension, multiply that by 20 and add on your tax-free cash sum. So that gives you a value, and that's tested against the lifetime allowance. And for a defined contribution, it's just the value of your fund. So you can get that from your benefit statement or online if you go online. Now, the difference here is where it does seem completely unfair is that the maximum pension that you can get without incurring a tax charge under a DB is around £50,000. For the equivalent pension from a defined contribution pension pot through by annuity, it's around £26,000 a year. So the rules obviously don't seem very fair to the private sector.
I mean, yeah, that's nearly double.
It's about nearly double. And the government doesn't seem to have any appetite for changing those particular rules. And of course, we in the pension industry are lobbying hard for the lifetime allowance to be removed for defined contribution pensions to enable people to save more over their lifetime. But of course, at the moment, because of everything that's going on, that's probably not going to happen in the foreseeable future, particularly as the lifetime allowance is actually frozen. So, you know.
Yeah, it's not looking likely just yet, but maybe in the future.
No, it's not a high priority, I'm afraid.
No. So if someone's nearing the lifetime allowance, should they stop paying into their pension? And should they then start putting the money into other savings accounts? So say like ISAs or lifetime ISAs if they're young enough?
They're young enough, yes. Well, I think, obviously more people are going to be affected by the lifetime allowance because it is frozen. So effectively, real values fall in, isn't it? So I think the important thing is if you think you're close to the lifetime allowance is to closely monitor it. Work out how much the value is using the defined benefit calculation and just working out what the value of all your defined contribution schemes are. Because remember, it's all your pensions, they're not looked at separately, it's all of them together. So add them all up together and work out how close you are. If you are very close, there are a few things you can do if you want to try to avoid the lifetime allowance charge. So try to avoid breaching the new standard lifetime allowance. You can stop paying contributions, obviously. If you're in the workplace, you're likely in a pension scheme and your employer will be paying a contribution for you. So it's probably a good idea to negotiate with something with them, that maybe instead of a pension contribution, they might, for example, increase another benefit, such as, including your salary. Obviously that's taxed, but it might be beneficial to you. Your own contributions, instead of putting that in pension, definitely look at an ISA, because obviously you can put up to 20,000 a year into an ISA. So make use of all your allowances there. A lifetime ISA, well, that's might be a bit more difficult because you have to be below 40, so 39 before you can actually open a lifetime ISA account. So that won't be open to everybody, that's for sure. But it's all about spreading your investments and diversifying, isn't it? And making use of your allowances, so you can keep on saving.
Yeah, and just on that, so if we move on to ISAs versus pensions now, so looking on the side of saving into your pension, which do you prioritize? What do you pay into first?
Yes, that's a really interesting thing. Again, a very, very common question, and it's not a binary choice at all. If you've got the money to be able to do it, it's good to do both for diversification. But if you are in a workplace pension, if you're employed, you'll probably have access to workplace pension. You've probably been auto-enrolled in it or saving in it anyway. So it would absolutely make sense to stay in that pension and benefit from the employer contribution. And it could be that if you pay a bit more into your pension, that your employer might pay a bit more in it. And so maximize your pension contributions for sure. But also look at the ISA for the flexibility. Now, to remember that a pension and an ISA, they do look very similar on the outside, don't they? They seem to work in the same way, but in actual fact, they operate on extremely different tax rules. A pension was obviously designed to provide a retirement income. An ISA is not necessarily, but can be used for that. So a pension is much more tax efficient than an ISA. You get marginal tax relief, or whatever rate you're paying, 20, 45, 40%. You can pay in much more than an ISA. You pay in 40,000 or your earnings if less, and your employer can pay into your pension. For an ISA, it's 20,000, so half that on the pension, and the employer can't pay into an ISA. What else is it? They're both very similar. They both have tax-free growth, so they look very similar. You can invest both in stocks and shares. Obviously, cash ISA can go into cash. One of the big differences is how you take the money out, of course, because ISAs, when you take the money out, there is no income tax on that. For a pension, apart from 25% tax-free cash, the rest will be taxed as under income. And another thing to be aware of is the IHT rules, the inheritance tax rules. So pensions aren't normally under those rules, so out with your estate, whereas an ISA is included in the IHT rules. So there's quite a few differences there, but one can be more flexible at certain times, but you can certainly save more into a pension. Your employer could put a lot more in as well to help you save for retirement. And also, I should have mentioned that an ISA obviously you can take out any time you wish, whereas a pension, we all know it's locked away until age 55 and 57 from 2028. Of course, I personally think that's a good thing. Things are locked away. That's why it's good to have a pension and an ISA, isn't it? You can lock away your pension for when you're much, much older and you don't have to touch it. Whereas an ISA, you could save into that, use all your allowances, but then dip into that and not affect your income tax by taking money out. So it sounds great.
What about looking at comparing it to property now? We have had a few questions about this. One, let me just read the question out.
Yeah.
They said, my adult children do not think they'll require a pension and are of the opinion that income from investing in properties will provide better security in their retirement. Do you have suggestions? Yes.
Again, a really common question. A lot of people really like the idea of investing in property and building like a portfolio or an empire of buy-to-let properties. It's something tangible, whereas pensions then not seen as tangible. But the thing is that property is not designed to provide a retirement income. A pension is. And as I've already explained, pensions have so many tax advantages over ISAs, but even more tax advantages over property. And property isn't as tax efficient as it was even just a few years ago. So the government has reduce the rules. I'm not an expert on property, so I can't talk too much about that. But you need to think about, on your property, is your outcome, your income going to exceed your outcome? The cost of actually having that property and renting it out, is the value going to go up all the time? Well, people tend to think it is, but is it? Are you going to get enough rent to cover your costs and all these sort of things? So it's quite challenging. Whereas pensions, you put the money away, you get your tax relief, and then you take your pension out and it provides you with a retirement income. But just like with ISAs, it's not a binary choice. So you could have a bit of both if that's what you want. But I would say about these adult children, I don't know whether they're working or not. I assume they are. In today's environment, let's assume they are. They could be employed. So again, they could have a workplace pension. So it would seem not a particularly good idea to say no to the workplace pension and give up the employer contribution, because obviously that's part of their pay package, isn't it? Why would you give that up? So for me, it's both. If they really want to do property, fine, but don't forget about your pension, and you probably already have access to a pension that you can save in.
Yeah. And just jumping back to, I know you touched briefly on inheritance tax there, and some of the rules around that. I know that some of the questions that are popping up in the live chat are about how it works with SIPs and how much, if any, inheritance tax you pay on that, and also if beforehand you can actually start to pass on some of the money down to your children before you've passed away as well.
Oh, before you passed away. So I suppose it's just like a gift and anything else from your income, not from your, well, if you are drawing a pension, is that what they mean? If they've actually taken a pension, you could pass it over, you could give some of it to your grandchildren, just as you would under the gift rules. As long as you don't, it's just the same as all the other IHT rules, as far as I'm aware, that you mustn't put yourself on the poverty line, deprive yourself of income, as it were, and the 7-year rule is all affected. So I believe it's all similar rules to that. But again, on a big difference about the pension rules is they have a really good death tax rules if you happen to die before age 75, because any unused pension funds that you've got in your SIP and your income drawdown, so you've not drawn on them, they're still in there, they can be payable to your beneficiaries free of tax, income tax, and free of IHT. They don't normally attract IHT, so it's free of tax. But the important thing there, as in any sort of death benefit situation, is that you, the pension holder, has completed a nomination form or expression of wish form saying who you want to benefit from those funds, so who you want to leave your unused pension benefits to, which loved ones. So you should make sure that's always up to date. Also, how you would like them to receive it, as a cash sum, as an income drawdown. Check out what those options are available. Word of warning: not every pension provider does give you those two options, though. So it's good to do a little bit of research beforehand, but certainly make sure your nomination form is up to date.
Okay, and I know we touched on the kind of order of what you should prioritize saving into, but if we look at spending that money in retirement, where should you be drawing your income first? Right,
well, this really depends on what you've got. If you do, as we already mentioned, if you do have an ISA and a pension, I think for me the golden rule is don't take out too much too quickly. Try to manage your income tax effectively, so try to not pay more than you need to. So mentioned ISAs. When you take that out, you can use ISAs as retirement income, and they're a really useful tool because there's no income tax payable on those. Is IHT payable on that? So you might want to use that first, and then start using your pension and take out your tax-free cash. You don't have to take out your income part, so you can just keep that locked away, invested in your income drawdown, and it will grow over time. So I think you need to think about when the income tax is payable, and what sort of income you need as well. How much do you actually need? Do you actually need to start drawing on your pension? Is your ISA enough? Should you access your defined benefit pension if you've got that, before accessing your defined contribution? I mean, do you think this is a good time to talk about that hideous rule, the money purchase annual allowance? And what a nightmare that is.
Yeah, I mean, was it hundreds of thousands of people fell into that, triggering these really punitive tax rules last year. Yeah, the money purchase annual allowance does seem difficult, especially during the pandemic when people really needed to access some of their pension money because either, you know, they've suffered a loss in income or they've been made redundant. So they, you know, if they're over 55, they choose to take some of their pension income and then find suddenly these new tax rules. So do you want to talk us through how they work?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So what happens is under the pension freedom rules, if you access your pension, for example, in a flexi access income drawdown, and you take out more than the 25% tax-free cash, even £1 more, and that's called your income, £1 more of that, then automatically you'll trigger the money purchase annual allowance. Now, the annual allowance normally is 40,000 a year or 100% of your earnings if less, okay? But as soon as you trigger this money purchase annual allowance because you're taking out a bit of income from your flexi access drawdown, it goes down from 40 all the way down to 4,000. And once it's done, it's done. You can't undo that, you know, it's there forever. So what that means is if you've had to take your money out for whatever reason, because you need it or you know, you've done an extension or whatever, but you haven't really thought about the implications, tax implications, it really limits how much you can save in a pension going forward, because you only save 4,000 and get tax relief. Of course, you can save more, but you don't get tax relief on it. So it's really could really damage your retirement income plans, and I think it has for a lot of people. You know, they're not aware of this, so it's really unfortunate. It's very draconian, to be honest with you, and it's a bit outdated.
I mean, I saw some analysis which found that more than 1,000 people were falling into this tax trap every single working day last year. And that overall, more than 600,000 people were accessing their pension pot for the first time during the pandemic. And that most people, I think it's 80% of people, aren't aware of it. So that's the real danger.
Yes. Yeah, I know. This is why, you know, really people, before they access it, they need to do the research. Ideally, they should talk to Pensions Wise, the guidance body, or get advice, you know, because these are quite damaging tax rules. If you do fall into it, like I said, you can't undo it. It's happened. You can't say, oh, Mr. Revenue, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to do it, because it's done, you know. Yeah. So we do need to raise awareness of that one.
But this would be one classic case. So we did get one question in that said, so they said, I had retired from my business and have begun drawing down my pension.
Yeah.
Due to the pandemic devastating my business, I've gone back to work. Can I start paying into my pension again?
Yes, and the answer is it probably can, but check with the pension provider just to make sure he can. But because he appears to have started taking income from his income drawdown, he will be limited to the amount he's paying in. So he can only pay in £4,000 and get tax relief on that 4,000. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And just, I mean, there are plenty of tax quirks that we could talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, one is the carry forward. So another question we got in was, with carry forward, can I claim the extra 25% tax relief for previous years? So how does that work?
Yes, I'll just talk about what carry forward is, because it's again one of these little known rules, but in actual fact, it's a good rule. Unlike the money purchase annual allowance, it's a good rule. So it's one that people should know more about, I think. So carry forward basically allows individuals to pay additional pension contributions using unused annual allowance from previous tax years, previous tax years. So it goes back, for this current tax year we're just in, from day one today, it goes back to 2018-19. So what you do is you would look back and see whether you used up your annual allowance or not. And if you haven't, you could use those rules and pay extra to 40,000. But as always, there's a few sort of things that you could be caught out on. So I'm going to give a little example. It's not exactly the 25%, but let's say today you're somebody who earns 80,000 a year. You've already paid 40,000, so bear with me because I know it's the first day of the tax year, but let's pretend you've already done that. So you've got 40,000 left, and you want to pay. You can pay 40,000 more in, because remember, you can only pay contributions up to your earnings. The carry forward allows you to pay more than the annual allowance, but it's still 100% of your earnings rule is still effective. So you can only pay 80,000. You paid in 40 this year, and you look back, starting from the furthest year away, to see whether you can pay. Let's say you can. So now you can pay the other 40,000, so you can double your contribution this tax year. You won't get, so obviously 80,000, you would be a higher rate taxpayer. You won't get higher rate tax on every single part of that pension, just on the marginal amount. So, say, higher rate tax, it starts at 50,000 approximately, doesn't it? So you get 30,000 equivalent tax relief, 30,000 of income equivalent tax relief on that, on the marginal amount. And you'll get other basic rate on the bit below that, etc. So the answer is you can get tax relief, but you still have to have enough earnings to be able to pay that contribution and get that tax relief. So that rule is still in place. It is quite complicated, I know, and it'd be quite good to have a worked example so you can see it in front of you.
Yeah. And so another tax question that we received was for someone who's got a private pension. Is there anything they can do to reduce tax by doing things like sharing it with their spouse? Yeah,
that's a really interesting one, because unfortunately, pensions, they do work the same as income tax, so it's all on you as the individual. So pensions are taxed as income, and you have your individual allowances, the annual allowance and the lifetime allowance and the money purchase annual allowance if you happen to be triggered by that. So what you could do, so you can't share the pension as such, but what you could do, if you've both got pensions, instead of one person accessing all the pension and getting a very high income, so then it breaks the next income tax threshold, so you pay too much tax. What you could do is you both take out a bit of pension each, so then added up, it comes to the joint income that you want to receive. And so you don't overpay on tax, and therefore you're maximising the amount of pension savings you've got. So you could think about that. That's one thing. Another thing to think about is if you, as the individual, has got quite a significant pension, but perhaps your partner, your spouse hasn't. So you could pay third-party contributions into their pension, and that's up to 100% of their earnings. Or if they haven't got any earnings, it's 2,880 plus the tax relief of 20%. So you get 3,600 going in. So our tax heaps are doing it's basically about managing your finances and managing your tax allowances.
There's another question that keeps cropping up on the side is about giving some of the money from your pension but to your children. So there's one here that says they don't intend to draw their pension at all, just add to it. So as an inheritance gift to their kids, can they use it and move the money from theirs and put it into their pension plans?
Right, so there's two things here. So I'll talk about the death benefit first. So if you die, and I've mentioned this already, so if you die before age 75, there's no income tax payable by the beneficiaries when they receive it. So that's where you have to keep your nomination form up to date. So nominate your grandchildren to receive, 25% or whatever it is that you want them to receive. And should you die before 75, they get it tax free. And that could then, you could find out whether that on your death, when the pension provider is able to put that into an income drawdown account for your grandchildren, and then they can start drawing on it much later in life when they're 57, as it turns out. So it could be it's called recycling in that way. After age 75, similar sort of thing, it could happen, but of course income tax is payable. So it is possible on the death benefit side. And if on the living passing on, of course you could do that. I think I mentioned that earlier through the gift rules.
But so if it was paid directly into their pension, could they get tax relief on that?
Oh, right. So if you as a grandparent are paying into a child's pension, remember a child's pension you can set up from the day they're born. That's quite possible. So you pay, because it's a child, they're not earning anything. So you pay in 2,880, that's the maximum you can pay in as a third-party contribution to somebody who's not earning. And then the pension provider will apply to the revenue to increase that by 20%. So the maximum that will go in is 3,600. So that tax relief is gained by your grandchild, not by you as the individual who paid the contribution. So it goes into their pension pot for them.
Okay, and just while we're on tax relief there, could you just walk us through salary sacrifice and how that works?
Yes, just one moment. So salary sacrifice, that's an agreement or arrangement between an employer and an employee to reduce an employee's cash pay, usually in return for a non-cash benefit, such as a pension contribution. So it's a very, very tax efficient way of boosting pension contributions. As the salary that's exchanged, it's knocked off your salary, say it's £10,000, salary exchange isn't liable to income tax, so you as an individual don't pay income tax on that, and it's not liable to national insurance contributions either. That's your own and the employer's, so the saving for the employer, the saving for yourself. And that's because it technically becomes an employer pension contribution. So it's no longer a personal pension contribution, it's the employer one. So it's a really useful tool. But one of the things I should just point out, because there are downsides to this, most people will gain, I think, but there are downsides. So a reduced salary can lead to reduction in some state benefits and could impact things like mortgage applications. And it's not possible to use salary sacrifice to take earnings below the national minimum wage either. But salary sacrifice is a really, really useful tool. And most employers do offer that now as well, because they make savings of what you said. It's a useful tool to basically to either keep your take-home pay the same and increase your pension contributions, or increase your take-home pay and keep the amount of pension contributions the same that you pay into your pension pot. You can do either way, different ways of doing it. So, you know, like I said, lots and lots of employers, ever since auto enrollment came in 2012, use it. It's a very, very popular way to increase pension contributions and make savings.
Okay. And I just wanted to move on to the idea of, you know, most people nowadays will have multiple pension pots. I know that we moved jobs quite a lot. I can't remember what the figure was, but I know that it's over 10 times, I think, now. In the average,
yes, it could be more, couldn't it, now, because of the pandemic.
And so every time you change jobs, a lot of people, I imagine, will leave their pension behind. And so what happens then? What are the benefits of bringing all your pots together each time you move work? And is that something that people should be doing?
So that there are lots of benefits. So the obvious benefits, if you bring them all together, you can keep track of them, so you know where they are. One of the things about auto enrollment, one of the side effects, is that people are every job comes with a pension, and because of the sort of environment we're in, people don't often stay in jobs very long either, for whatever reason. So they've got numerous pensions, as you said, and I think that's only set to increase. And a lot of these are tiny. Some are bigger, you know, there might be a range. But if you consolidate them, you bring them all together, perhaps into your latest workplace pension scheme, you could see them all. You can see the value, so it's more meaningful to you as an individual, because you know, when you add these all together, you might find them more than your salary, or even much more significant than that. So that's one big benefit. So you have visibility and hopefully become more engaged with them. Another one is that if you've been around for a long time, you might find that you've got some very old style sort of legacy type pensions, which might have high charges. And if you move them into a modern style pension, you'll often find they have lower charges, so you make savings that way. And also the modern style pensions, they tend to have better online tools, engagement tactics, maybe better investment choices, as well as lower charges. So a whole range of benefits. But one thing you do need to be careful, because there's always pitfalls when it comes to pensions, isn't there? And that is that some of these older style pensions might have some sort of very valuable benefits, such as things like guaranteed annuity rates, or some sort of promise that once you transfer away to a new pension scheme, you will lose those. So you need to always be aware of that. But there are lots of benefits of consolidating, so it's definitely worth a look at.
Yeah, and I imagine one of the risks must be that you lose track of pots. I know that there's a lot of money that's in these lost pension pots at the moment. I spoke to one lady last year. She was 52. After her husband passed away, she started looking into his pensions again and discovered a pot that was worth nearly £140,000. And at the time, the company repeatedly told her that they couldn't find the pot at all. It didn't exist.
Really?
And it was only when she got a financial advisor involved that they managed to track it down. So for people who suspect they might have an old pension somewhere, how can they go about tracking down those pots?
Right, so it's actually really quite simple, because the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, they've actually got an online pension tracing tool, or you can ring them up. And you could do this to find your old pension. Put your name of your employer in, if you remember it, because we do know obviously employers have changed, mergers and acquisitions and what have you, some have come and gone. Put your name of your employer in there, or if you know your name of your pension provider, put that in, and hopefully they'll have the contact details to enable you to find out who is actually looking after your pension these days, and you can rejoin that pension, join up again and find it. So that's definitely worth a go, and hopefully we can provide a link for that. It's a really, really useful tool.
Okay, and I guess one thing we really should mention is that today the state pension has gone up again.
Yeah.
It's had a boost. So from today, it's gone up about 2.5%. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. No, it's a really, really good news story. This one is so state pensions have increased by 2.5%. It's increased by the triple lock, basically. So just remind our audience, they're probably already familiar with this, but the triple lock is where state pensions have increased by the highest of average earnings prices that's measured by the Consumer Price Index, and 2.5%. So 2.5% is the higher of those at the moment, so it's gone up. And the new state pension has gone up to £179.60 a week. So it's almost at £9,500 a year. Hope you get that in a few more years. So that is a really good news story for all those getting a pension at the moment.
Okay, and what about, so some of the questions we're getting in are from people who live abroad and say, is it worth topping up their UK state pension? I guess that must depend where they live. Is that right?
It depends where they live and whether they're entitled to it. It's one they should look at to see whether they can top up their state pension and whether they're eligible to do that. And there's, that will depend on their circumstances. For some people, it is a good idea, and others, they'll just be wasting their money. So they need to investigate on that. So I can't give a definite answer on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, investigate before putting the money in.
Definitely have a chat with the DWP. In fact, one of my friends, he's not overseas, he lives just down the road. His wife was a few years short. She was 3 years short in their national insurance contributions. So she rang the DWP, I forget what they call them now, but their helpline, to find out about, should they pay national insurance contributions? And they looked into it and they said, yeah, it would be a good idea, but don't pay 3, because that 1 year you wouldn't get any benefit from that. So just pay 2. So they're going through that process just now. So that just shows you why it's a really good idea to ring up the DWP and have a chat. Now, one thing they did mention as well, it took him over an hour for the DWP to answer the phone. So he had to just keep holding on. But he got there in the end.
And I guess on the other side of it, you should check you're getting paid the right amount if you are over the state pension age.
Yeah, that's very topical, isn't it?
Yeah, last week it came out that it's more than 74,000 married women in Britain have been underpaid and are set to receive up to £23,000 after years of being shortchanged. And I think there's a total across all the groups, 200,000 women who've been underpaid and who can now get refunds, and the government's due to pay back about 2.9 billion, which is a huge amount. So definitely worth checking you're receiving the right amount of state pension.
Yes, and also, just to make sure not only the right amount for those people who are actually receiving it, for those people who are coming close up to retirement, to state pension age, which 66, it's 67 for me. it's a good idea to find out how much you're going to be entitled to, and whether you do have gaps in national insurance contribution record, and whether you should pay those gaps. So that's really important to do, because for most people, an awful lot of people in the UK, the state pension is still the bedrock of the pensions, and it's going to continue to be that way.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.